Thank you, Kathy. Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for spending about an hour. We don't have to take an hour. It all depends on the questions that we get. But if you don't know me, I'm Tony Russo. I'm president of CIA&J. I'm joined by my colleagues, Julia, Kathy, Sally, and I know Tareen's going to be joining us. And we have a bunch of different folks, membership, that are on today to talk about the law that the governor signed last Thursday that really makes significant changes, I believe, to the Open Public Records Act. Let me give you some background because I actually listened to testimony as the bill was going through. And I've been in Trenton now 25 years, and I can't remember the last time a bill really became very emotional, both sides, to the point where one speaker that was opposed to this bill as a member of press actually had to be escorted out by the state police. I mean, that's how the testimony got. The other thing that was quite phenomenal, and I don't see so often, but this was very bipartisan in terms of how the vote ended. So this is not a Republican issue. It's not a Democrat issue. I think I spoke to the Assemblywoman Flynn, who was a sponsor on the Republican side. Senator Solo, who's the budget chair, was a sponsor. Anthony Bucco, who's the Senate minority on the Republican side, was a sponsor. So this is a big deal. And I want to give everybody some background. We can get into the details of it. But so why did the bill actually happen? OPRA, the original Open Public Records Act law, was signed 22 years ago in 2002. Based on all accounts, and we represent about 9 members from virtually every business sector. Many of our professional services folks, I know we have some environmental folks on this call, and I'm an ex-DEP employee. I know they really relied on the Open Public Records Act to get documents on a case they may be working on. So whether it's a state document, whether it's a local document, county, it's important, right? Because in order to do our businesses, sometimes we need government records. And what was nice about OPRA was there was a form you filled out, and I guess the receiving agency had 7 working days to respond to you. The problem is, over the last 22 years, a lot of the mayors, the records custodians from all these townships and agencies basically were overwhelmed. And that's basically the proponent side of the bill. There was something that came out during testimony that said more than 250,000 OPRA requests were submitted last year alone. Right now, this is everything, right? Township, state, county. So you could imagine that if you're a municipality or a mayor, you kind of could empathize with them saying, okay, I have assigned a records custodian. I get this OPRA request, and now I have 7 working days to get it. Also, and I'm speaking to the other side, and we'll talk about, what the problems are. So they're basically saying a lot of these OPRA requests were sent in, weren't specific, they were broad, which ended up being denied. A lot of them were litigated. And what's interesting was when the litigation was over, if the prevailing party won, they would be awarded attorney fees, right? So you could imagine, right, if you're sitting on that side of the, the desk, and you're getting all these requests, you could see that this could be overwhelming at times, right? So what was the intent? You speak to the sponsors, they said, look, we got to really figure out a way where it doesn't overwhelm the townships and all the agencies when these OPRA requests come in. But I know, again, depending on your perspective, they may have went too far. The other thing that was really brought up during the testimony is apparently there are a lot of companies, for-profit companies, that really lived and died by these OPRA requests. And what they would do is they would submit an OPRA request, they would harvest the data, and then they would sell that data for profit. So a lot of the testimony was around, well, how do we get rid of these data brokers, right? How do we get rid of this industry that's propped up that basically lives and dies off of these OPRA requests, and then they turn around and sell the data? Ironically, if you look at the final bill, and I could pull it up, it really does none of that, right? So what they did add one requirement, which I'll talk about. Now, when you submit an OPRA request, and this is probably the most controversial part of it, you do have to certify. So you do have to certify that OPRA request, that you will not profit from that OPRA request. What does that mean? I don't know, right? I think it's all depends on what's something that's part of this. It's been around since 2002. is something called the Government Records Council, the GRC. So this bill, now law, and by the way, I should point out that this is going to take effect in September. So September 5th, technically, this law goes into effect. So what are they going to do over the next 3 months? I'm sure the Government Records Council and everybody's trying to think they have to come up with a new form that people are going to submit if they want to do an OPRA request. What that new form looks like, I don't know. I think that's going to be something that we're all going to have to be vigilant on, because that's going to be the key is how does that form change? And then what's submitted, and more importantly now, this certification that goes along with it. Again, I don't know if you look at the definition of commercial purpose, it does say that you can't profit, anybody that profits from it, and I'll use our environmental industry as an example. So if I'm an environmental professional, a licensed site remediation professional, and I make an OPRA request, am I profiting from that request? Somebody could argue yes, right, on a township side, and they could have a problem with that. And that's one of the issues that I foresee here is that a township, an agency might look at this request, even though you send in your certification, that you're not directly or indirectly profiting from it in the terms of taking that information that you receive. I could see somebody arguing that an environmental consultant, an LSRP, profits from it. So that's something that we just have to be vigilant on and cognizant of as we go through this. So, who's exempt from this commercial purposes is labor organizations, nonprofits, and the news media, right? So they're not kind of buttoned in here, and also political candidates. Because one of the things that came up is, during elections, everybody wants to know who are the voters. So a lot of people submit these OPRA requests, and then they get the information in terms of trying to harvest who the voters are, whether you're a Democrat, Republican. So a lot of these folks are exempt from that commercial purpose. So just kind of keep that in mind. The other core argument for this new reform was that we need to protect personally identifiable information, right? Even though that was part of the law in 2002, what they wanted to do was enhance it. So again, they're stretching out saying, well, what else besides your social security number, your address, your name can be personally identifiable information? The one thing, and again, it's in the bill, now the law, basically says that an email address of somebody at a state agency is not considered personally identifiable information. And I think that's important. But, they threw in their videos, they threw in, other things that can kind of connect the dots and say, oh, that's personally identifiable information. So it's pretty clear based on the new reform that anything that is the PII, is going to be excluded from any OPRA requests. More importantly, too, is that if you're going to submit an OPRA request for any document or data that's older than 24 months, that data is not going to be immediately accessible. What does that mean? It's undefined, right? In terms of immediate access to it. This law also gives the records custodian a lot of flexibility to deny requests that aren't specific. Again, that was an issue that's kind of popped up over the last 22 years, but also that is attainable via the internet. And this is one where I actually did a test, right? Because I've talked to a bunch of mayors, I've talked to a bunch of local folks, and you would think that a municipal budget would be a prime example where that information needs to be on the internet, right? If you're going to do something that has to deal with money, you would think it would be easily available on the internet. And sprinkled in throughout this law, it basically says, look, the whole intent here of these reforms is, in 2002, even though the internet was around, it's kind of matured now in 22 years. So, government agencies should push more stuff, everything to the internet, right, to online. So you're going to see, and actually, I don't think it's a lot of money, but in the law, they basically allocated about $10 million for the state and the Government Records Council to actually educate townships, counties, and state agencies to push as much information online as they can. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. Again, I did a test. I didn't see a lot of information. It's not easy to find budgets. But for example, people would submit, well, I want to see who else bid on that contract, right? I want to see logs, right? Whether it's correspondence, emails. A lot of that, my read again, and I'm not an attorney, but I know we have a lot of attorneys on today, is a lot of that information is going to be left out and redacted, which could be good or bad. So, just kind of keep that in mind. Again, the certification is probably the biggest thing there. The other thing too is if you are a chronic requester and you request too many OPRA requests, and again, it's undefined, the township or the agency can actually sue you. So you think about it, right? Why the press and everybody was up in arms is, now if you submit too many requests, undefined, you could be prosecuted, and it could be a disorderly conduct. Oh, my voice is going in and out. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. Um, anyway, you could be prosecuted. So there's a lot of things in this law that I think we need to kind of think about. And I'm curious to get everybody's feedback. And again, it's only been a few days. It hasn't even been codified yet into chapter law. I haven't seen the chapter law. Basically, what I did was looked at the final reprint that the legislature voted on. And just to give you an idea how controversial it was, on the Senate side, we have 40 senators and you need 21 votes to get this through. The final vote was 21-10, which tells me that 9 senators actually didn't even abstain, didn't even vote on this, but barely got through the Senate by 1 vote. On the Assembly side, you need, out of 80 Assembly people, you need 41 votes. This received 42 votes in the affirmative, 28 in the negative, and 1 abstention. And again, when I looked at the vote count, this was Republicans and Democrats that crossed over. So this is rare. I mean, that you had this kind of information. And again, when I was at a fundraiser and I spoke to Assemblywoman Flynn, who was the Republican sponsor, and I said, look, Assemblywoman, this has actually caused a lot of consternation to our professionals that have relied on these OPRA requests to do their business. And she kind of caught off guard by it. She's like, well, can you give me more specifics? And I said, look, I'm sure as we go along here, and this was before the governor signed the law, there was actually word in Trenton that, he was going to conditionally veto this bill. But if you look at his statement, which again, we sent out to everybody, he was pretty, he took his time going through it. He understood what the concerns were, that there wasn't going to be a lot of transparency. There wasn't going to be a lot of accountability here. And he wants to guard against it. And only in extreme cases, again, according to his statement, you're going to see prosecutions against people asking for data. So it's one of these where I think we just have to be cognizant of it. And again, and I'll kind of take a pause there just to see if who's read it and what people's concerns are. But for the attorneys out there, you can't request any information that's subject to a court order. That was new language that was entered into there. So you would be denied if you're looking for a social media post, text. And again, this is all, things that are related to discovery. You will not be allowed, or you would be, I guess, denied if you ask for those requests. Also, you can pay a special fee if you want the information within 7 days. The custodian can charge you a special fee. Again, that's not defined in the law, and I'm sure the regulations will kind of address to that. So I'll kind of take a pause there. Again, I want to keep this very informal. I read it about 3 times now. I listened to all the testimony. I listened to both sides. I just kind of take a pause there and see if anybody has any really just major concerns with this or any questions that I may not have touched on. I guess folks have folks read it, or probably not. Are folks concerned with the way that things are going to happen again? I see Dan joined us. Hi, Dan. Again, I talked to some members. I guess the one thing again, and we can kind of talk through it, but again, this will take effect September 5th. Whether or not this is going to be modified, I doubt it. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, I thought this was going to be held. It went through. The governor signed it. Now we're going to law. I think time will tell whether or not The records custodians across the board are going to take advantage of this, and you're going to see more things denied. But the unfortunate thing here is, again, from our perspective, is I think a lot of things are going to be now taken off the table in terms of what's going to be available. And whether or not we're going to see things being posted to the internet, again, that's a massive undertaking. I think $10 million is not a lot of money. If you've had experience trying to track things down, which I tried to do on municipal sites, it's just the information is not there, right? How contracts are awarded, how attorneys are paid at the planning board or engineering consultants, all that information I know was subject to OPRA. Now it should still be subject to OPRA. And again, according to the testimony, if you read the language in the law, it basically says, townships, agencies are obligated to push as much information over to the web as they can. It just doesn't give them a time frame on when they need to do it. So again, it's, you've probably read the news reports about the fee shift, and again, the fees shift, and again, if the prevailing party wins, the fees are still going to be awarded, but now a lot of flexibility or that decision making is now going to be left to the records custodian and the agency being asked for that information. I should also mention too that if you do want a physical copy, right? So again, this is going to be information where you make your request. I know a lot of us are asking for that information to be sent electronically. That may take some time, so think about that, right? If the townships don't have, or the state agencies don't have a mechanism to put things online or to send it to you electronically, you can ask for a physical copy, and they can't charge you for more than twice the cost of physically producing that information. So a lot there. So I'll take a pause there just to see if anybody had any concerns, questions.
Tony?
Yeah.
Quick question, and apologize, I've read through it once, but not in as much detail as you. Question for you: if it goes effective early September, is there anything in there about how OPRA requests that are submitted prior to the effective date are going to be handled? Are they going to be handled any differently than the current process? Because I don't know, I guess I foresee an avalanche of requests going in before September 5th.
Yeah, good question, Dan. And the answer is nothing in the bill now law that kind of talks to anything before September 5th. And again, the Government Records Council, which exists today, is going to be expanded. And if you read the law, it basically adds about, how many from the Senate, how many from the Assembly, members of the public. I guess they're going to be obligated, Dan, to come up with a new form, right? And that's going to be the rub, is what does that new form look like? I doubt that September 5th, we're going to see that new form. I can't imagine that we're actually going to be that efficient as a government to come out with a new form, but I could be wrong. But I mean, at this point, if you also want to litigate a matter before the Records Council too, and I forget, I'm just checking my notes. I think you have about 45 days after your request has been denied to appeal that decision before the Records Council. So a lot's going to be determined, and I agree with you, Dan. A lot of information is probably going to go in, and they're probably going to have to deal with it ahead of time. Hold on, I got a question here. Data broker question. We get asked for purchase order registers each year and also for a list of. Whoever asked that question, I mean, do you mind unmuting and asking it? Or Kristen?
Hi. So we get asked for our spending, and it might just be like for Open the Books or that, that kind of transparency organization. That is not the organization that asks for these registers, but for every year, literally forever, we get asked for what our spending is, what are we purchasing, and they want to see what we've spent, with whom, the amounts. And then the second part of that is we get asked for a list of any uncashed checks from businesses under $1,000. So how do we know if they're profiting, if they're selling this information, or if this is just a transparency thing?
So I'm not sure who you're with, Kristen, and don't feel obligated if you don't want to identify yourself, but that's all going to be played out in that certification that's yet to be seen, right? That's the new twist here, is that requester has to certify that they're not going to use it for profit. So if they can't certify to that point, then you could deny that request. Are you a records custodian or?
Yeah, we're with Bergen Community College.
Okay. Yeah, so you
Is-
would be a good example, Kristen, that, you're a public entity. You could be asked that. In my side, my view, you're the records custodian of that information. They would have to certify that they're not going to use that information for profit.
And how would we ever know that they're using it for profit or not?
Well, if they certify that they won't, then you just have to assume that they're not. And then if it turned out not to be the case, there are fines here, by the way, that I didn't talk about that are hefty. Yeah, so I think, but to answer your question, I guess time will tell, but yeah, I think that certification is gonna assuage any concern you may have that if it's for profit, then you don't have to give it to them.
Okay.
Somebody asked, I guess it was Miranda, would like to hear from environmental as how they plan to deal with these upcoming changes. Anybody want to opine on that?
Oh, this is Steve from Land. I'm not an LSRP. We have LSRPs in house, and we also do, a decent amount of due diligence work for attorneys and lenders and purchasers on the phase 1, phase 2 side. And as part of that, kind of ASTM standard during that due diligence period, we do always submit. It's usually the first thing we do is submit those OPRA requests for all, pertinent files from the building department, health department, and all that. I guess if there was a firm who, it's certainly not our core business, so we're not doing dozens of phase 1s a month or anything. But I would imagine that if there were a firm that was doing a ton, it could be seen at some point as, especially if you were doing it in one city or one town where they could, kind of feel like you are being too much of a pain in the neck. So I'm curious to see how that's going to shake out. I know
That's a good point, Steve. It's a good point.
And the other thing, just from a professional services firm and submitting in response to, submitting proposals for RFPs and RFQs, not always, but there are times when if we don't get selected, where we would request, and I know that leads to some other questions in terms of what things can be redacted from those, but that's another thing that is interest to me to see if we are able to request, the winning proposal that another firm submitted.
Yeah, and I guess the theme from all the testimony, every comment from legislators was that they're going to obligate townships and agencies to post as much of that online, so you don't have to submit the OPRA request. I should say, and you make a good point, right? If you have one township, and I've heard this before, and I'll use the environmental consultant as an example, and this has happened quite a bit, where new LSRP is assigned to the case, and they send the DEP an OPRA request to say, here's the site that I'm working on. Give me every record that you have on the site. There's language in this law that basically says if you ask for more information than on the form, right? So you have to be very specific as to what they could deny it based on that alone. So
and some municipalities have already been doing that for the last 5 or 10 years to say you can't say all records.
Right.
You have to say specific things related to building permits or health department inspections or whatever. But and I would say, and our experience has been it's been kind of specific to the municipality, but a lot of places have been enforcing that, whether it's been allowed to be enforced previously or not, have been enforcing that for ages.
Right, and I guess they just codified it. That's basically saying that, you're going to get the form, ask, put the information on a form, but if you give them too much information, the custodian could say no. It's pretty clear that the custodian is going to have more teeth here because of this reform than they did in prior, right? And again, if information was delayed, you didn't get it within 7 business days, people litigated, and then it would go before a judge or the Government Records Council, and then if you won, you would get, the fees would be paid. Here, it's not so clear, right? So it's going to be left up to the custodian to really decide whether or not the request meets the new standard, whatever that new standard is. So a lot of questions that unfortunately aren't going to be answered based on what's in the law.
Tony, I have a question.
Yeah.
Was there any testimony regarding how criteria for searchability as these agencies are forced to push things out onto the internet? I can actually see that as a way to hide things. We're all familiar with what happened with ELEC, and there's a lot of suspicion about this OPRA change as well. But if they're pushing stuff out to the internet, are there going to be searchability criteria so it's easy to find stuff, or is this going to be a way to cloud things? For example, like when you were trying to track the COVID money, I can see that as an example of if there are things they want to hide, it'd be easy to hide it on the internet rather than maybe their own internal files.
Yeah, a good question, Jim. And the answer is nothing came up during the testimony. And I'll play off of your example because you and I have talked about this. If I went and submitted an Open Public Records Act to the Department of Treasury, right, to the treasurer herself, and I said, I want to know how you spent the CARES Act money, and I was that vague, that could probably be denied because I'm not specific enough. But what do you mean? Which one? Is it the rent relief money? Is it the money that went to healthcare? Okay, I want to see the audits of all the CARES money, right? Well, which audit? Because they did it on a quarterly basis. So I think, Jim, yeah, it's going to be harder, I think, to get that information. I mean, it's not available online now. If you think about the amount of information that's collected from the local, county, state agencies, whether we're talking about DEP, Treasury, Community Affairs, Department of Transportation, Department of Health, and then you trickle it down to the townships. There's just no way that's going to be available online. I think at the end of the day, you're going to have to be very specific to these new OPRA requests. But again, the thing that really bothered a lot of the people is the fact that now they could sue you. Now you have to certify that you're not using it for profit. And again, if you look at the definition of commercial purpose, I could stretch that out to say that the consultants are using it to profit, right? Because they have a job that they're working on, right? Now, I'm not aware of, and maybe this is a question, again, we could keep this very informal. I'm not aware that there was a problem out there with these data brokers that they would harvest this information and then sell it outside of what I talked about with elections. And, again, they're all exempt too. So labor, and labor is well represented in Trenton. And just to give you an idea, so one of the things that's in the law, if you're a labor organization, I'll use the CWA, I'll use the electrical workers, plumbers, the carpenters. If they're working out their collective bargaining agreement and they want to know whether or not the state, was in violation of wage and hour or independent contractor issues, that information made it in the law where the agency has to give it to them. So, it's pretty
Hey, Tony.
clear that they have to provide that information. Hi, Cecilia.
Hi. One thing I don't understand. So they're saying that they feel that this could be used for profit, but did they cite anything? You're saying you haven't seen anything like that, but if they're using that, what are they basing that on?
What, Cecilia? That was difficult, you mean?
Basing that people have used this information for profit. In other words,
Yeah, no, the answer is nobody that I heard in testimony actually came forward and said, yeah, we're that one company. And I hate to disparage attorneys, but I think they were implying that there were some law firms out there that were looking to trap the state agencies, counties, locals, that if they didn't abide by that 7-day rule, that they would then be sued and that the attorney's fees would be paid. Now, whether or not that happened, it was implied throughout the testimony clearly that there were entities out there that did this. Let's submit an OPRA request, and then when we don't get the answer within 7 days, they're in violation of OPRA, right? And then you would take them to the Government Records Council, take them to court, and then you would be reimbursed your attorney fees. So, but not really a lot of clear cut. This is how crazy it got, Cecilia. One lady basically said that she got into a car accident got a police report. She went to the police department and said, can I get a copy of my police report? And they told her, you have to submit an OPRA request for that.
Oh,
It's
oh,
like, yeah, this is how crazy it got. So,
because it's going to make a really difficult time for environmental consultants. I mean, we have to specifically state, you don't know what they have, so if it's not specifically listed, that means they don't have to provide the
right.
thing that you may not know. I mean, if we don't know what they have, how are we going to specifically list each individual item?
Yeah. And I'll take
Yeah,
bidding
it's,
process, right? I
and
mean,
then
you know,
did you say if you list too much, they can say that that's too many things? Or, I mean,
yeah,
where does,
yeah, absolutely. It says that whatever the form looks like, the new form, that if you give them too much information, it kind of throws them into a spin there that they could deny it based on that. I guess, and again, I'm trying to play it both sides that a lot of these records could start, but to your point, you don't know what you don't know. So if you've been asked to do a job, right, you're an environmental consultant or the attorney, and you want to know what was filed on that site, whether it goes from titles to deeds to lawsuits to, public work that was done. Yeah, then you don't know what you don't know. But yet, if they don't put it on the internet, then you're going to be left with having to submit an OPRA request. And I think here, Cecilia, I hope I'm wrong, but I think this is going to play itself out where you're going to start seeing what we have 565 municipalities. You're going to start seeing denials and people getting upset. And then I would imagine that the legislature will probably have to tweak this bill, now law, again, just to kind of avoid us going to that extreme where things aren't going to be Trenton. I've never seen it this bad in Trenton, right? And I'll use the state budget as an example, right? I was in Trenton yesterday. I was at the State House all day, and here it is, June 11th, and we're not even sure of the details of their final state budget yet. Now, I heard that we may not see it by July 1st. Think about that. I mean, it's $56 billion that we're not sure where it's going to be allocated. To me, that's just bad government. Again, whether you're Democrat, Republican, it's just bad government when there's no transparency. But the amount of information that's generated on their end,
Yeah.
what gets, to your point, that's why as a consultant or as an attorney now, you're going to have to be very specific in whatever document. And if you don't know, you're probably going to have to ask questions and then submit the OPRA request. I would not submit it first. Try to do your homework as to what document you're looking for, whether it's a bid, how many people bid on it, who won, what was, it's pretty clear now that draft emails, text messages, could be redacted. All right. So you can't follow their thought pattern as to how that project was awarded. I mean, again, my read on it, and I read it about 3 times now, but I listened to all the testimony. It's, people are worried, and rightfully so. I know we are as a business group. When the state spends our money, with whatever agency, it's not going to be clear cut now. I hope that it shows up on the internet, but I'm not hopeful. But going back to now, think about this, Cecilia. You certify that you're not going to use it for profit, and somebody has an issue with you using it as an environmental consultant to profit. Can somebody say that you legally certified you weren't going to use it? So to me, that's a threshold issue that has to be addressed, is what does this certification mean legally, right? You knowingly, submitted the OPRA request. You're certifying that you're not going to sell that information, but you are going to use it as
part of our job is a PA fee. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, because I know where you're going to go with it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's our job to actually collect this information. So are we using it for profit? Yeah, you could argue that, you can definitely argue that, but what do they mean? What is the definition of what they're talking about in terms of, using it for profit? Like you mentioned someone that's strictly using this data directly as, I guess, fishing it out and gaining a profit that way. That's not what we use it for. But are we doing our job? And is our job our business isn't philanthropy, so someone could argue that. Am I cutting out? Because Tony, you do cut out. so I don't know
I
if I
can
am
hear
as
you.
well.
I could hear you. I could hear
Okay.
you, Cecilia. Yeah, I could hear you fine.
Okay.
So I guess my advice to everybody is let's just be vigilant, and I'm going to stay on top of it. When I do see or hear that the new OPRA form is being deliberated and created, I think we need to comment on that vigorously. I think the certification form, we need to vet that and see what that means. And then we got to stay on top of them to put more things on the internet so it avoids you having to submit an OPRA request, because you don't want to be in that situation where you're paying all these extra fees now to get information faster, or you're going to have to litigate, and maybe that your attorney fees aren't going to be compensated or reimbursed. Any other concerns, thoughts? And I know, again, we don't have to take the whole hour here, but I just kind of wanted to let everybody know what happened last week. What I think is wrong with it. Again, it's that transparency. It's going to be more difficult to get information from agencies, and now that I guess I think life is about leverage, right? The leverage now shifted back to the records custodian, because now they have a lot of leverage to deny you under these reforms if the littlest thing goes wrong, right? So if you have too much information, it's going to be denied. If you don't have enough information, it's going to be denied. If you're looking for any personal identifiable information, it's going to be denied. If you're looking for draft emails, right, it's going to be denied. And oh, by the way, if you submit too many, you can get sued. Oh, and by the way, if you don't collect it, a lot when in terms of the enforcement, I mean, think about this, Cecilia, that they're actually, in the law now, they could prosecute you and you could have a disorderly kind of like crime against you because all you wanted was information.
Tony, sorry for the interruption. We just had a technical issue. We have a question from Cole Schatz.
Sure.
Hi, Tony. This is Wendy Berger. We do a lot of due diligence for our clients when they're buying properties, and we normally file OPRA requests to get zoning letters, to get copies of resolutions, copies of open permits. In New Jersey, you can't get a zoning endorsement on a title policy without a zoning letter.
Right.
And resolutions and permits are not recorded in the state of New Jersey. Some development agreements aren't recorded. So what is the answer there? And what happens between the time this is adopted in September until electronically all these documents may be available?
That's good question, Wendy. And I would say that if it's specific to that site and you specifically ask for that zoning letter, that currently they have to give it to you within 7 days if it exists. Or by the way, they have a choice to give it to you electronically, or if you ask for a physical copy, they could provide that. But come September, I guess my answer would be, you would hope that those kind of documents, and a lot happens at the planning board, zoning board level, a lot, but you don't see a lot on the websites, right? I think that's going to change now.
Almost nothing.
Yeah, almost. I was just going to say almost nothing. And that's why, Mike Serra, who runs the New Jersey League of Municipalities, I know he was interviewed, and I wouldn't be surprised if you know about the convention. I think they're going to have a lot of seminars and events around the new OPRA rules come November down there. So I just think we need to be vigilant. But I think, unfortunately, Wendy, I think it's going to be harder to get, and you just got to keep these other things in mind. Where again, you're just going to have to now. Before, you never certified anything, right? You wanted a document. You were either giving it to you or not, and then you decided whether you wanted to make an appeal. Now, you're certifying to something that you're not going to use it for profit. Again, it's unclear. So I think that's something that unfortunately has to be put out.
Tony, one more question. I would tell you that about 60% of the time that we file OPRAs, the town does not give it to us within the 7 days, and they ask for an extension. And we've had towns where I've asked for 3 or 4 extensions. So is that going to be eliminated, or do they still have the right to keep doing that?
No, good point, and that was in the law, and I'm sorry I didn't mention it, but yeah, now the custodian has more flexibility to ask for more time if, quote, it's reasonable
More
to
time.
ask for more time, right? So again, very vague, not a lot of detail, and honestly, it was unclear to me when the regulations come out. I mean, has anybody, because I haven't, ever dealt with the Government Records Council on any appeal?
No,
No.
Yeah, see, I'd be curious to hear from members how that process played out when you went before the Government Records Council. Again, I just think we're gonna have to just stay vigilant here. But you know what, Wendy, this is good feedback, and I told the sponsor of the bill that I'll collect these stories and I'll keep them, apprised of, what the issues are. And we're gonna see how it plays out. And if this starts going the other way, where, we're all concerned, then I think it's up to us. We're obligated to go back to the governor, to the speaker, and to the Senate president to say, okay, you guys passed these reforms. Now, look, here are some tangible examples of where, it's become more difficult and costly information that quite frankly should be on the websites. I mean, to me, Wendy, it starts with money, right? The state budget, municipal budgets, how contracts are awarded. They don't put a lot of stuff on there because I just don't think they have that capability, right? $10 million is not a lot of money to make everything electronic.
no, I understand. But Tony, one of the reasons we started filing OPRA requests is there's a case in New Jersey where someone went in for a zoning application and a neighbor got up and said, wait a second, the person who owned this property went in for this application 2 years ago and the board denied it. And the person said, well, I went to the town and asked them about doing this and they didn't tell me that. And the court, and went up to court, and the court said, well, if they didn't know about it and there was no reasonable way for them to find it out, then it's not going to be held against them. And I think that the court, this is opening this to more cases like that.
Agreed. And again, I think I mentioned it earlier, but the specific language that says if you're asking for something that's, older than 2 years, then you're not going to get it immediately, whatever that means. So I don't know.
That's almost everything.
I was gonna say, you're probably not gonna get it. And then it's a question of what we want to avoid here, and this is really incumbent upon all of us, and I know I've talked to the other business groups, is, we got to stay vigilant on this in the sense that if we're starting to see that it's becoming that much more difficult, then it's up to us to go back to the legislature and the governor to say, you got to go back to the way it was. I mean, I can empathize with, 250,000 requests, but don't punish everybody else because of a few bad actors that were called data brokers. And then the irony is, and this came up during testimony, that this bill, which was intended to get rid of the data brokers, really doesn't even do that, right? So accept that certification, right? So what's the penalty if you certify and then you sell it? It doesn't really say, right? It doesn't really say, what the penalties are going to be. I mean, I guess you could become a disorderly person, but there's the penalties for everything. It's just, to me, it's indicative of how, they tried to solve a problem, but I think they created more, and again, I just know in our sectors, I just know a lot of our folks really rely on this, way to get information and do their jobs, especially if you're on the environmental side.
Hey, Tony, you said you want to collect stories. Do we fill your email box, or are you going to create some forum that we can all chime in on?
No, I think, Bill, to keep it easy, is send me those stories. I'll create an OPRA folder.
Okay.
But yeah, I need to hear. I mean, I need to hear, because Dan brought up the point, it should be business as usual until September 5th.
Thanks.
Tony, this seems like this data brokerage is an excuse to be less transparent, frankly.
Yeah, Cecilia, again, and I hate to use the word, I won't use it, like, in terms of, again, I put myself in the township's shoes, right? They get a lot of information, like Wendy was saying, about zone and plan and municipal budgets, contracts, who's gone on your township website? I've gone on my township website, try to find a budget. and try to find the budget, the township budget on your websites. Not easy, number one. Number two, try to do a deeper dive into that budget, right? Try to go into the zoning board minutes or planning board minutes and try to find a resolution that was passed, to Wendy's point, or try to find something that was awarded a contract. Try to find that information. It's impossible to find. And I think if you submit that OPRA request now, you know, again, with this, the other thing to keep in mind, Cecilia, and again, personally identifiable information. Personally identifiable information. So if you're questioning an engineering firm or a law firm that's got the contract, you know, can they just deny it based on the fact that you're asking for that identifiable information? That you want to know who was the person that submitted it? It's unclear to me. And again, I'm not an attorney, but I would encourage everybody to read the law. It's 33 pages. You know, it's, you know, I'm sure, you know, that's going to cause a lot of consternation out there, is that, you know, I agree with you, Cecilia. It's going to make us less transparent. And by the way, I'm seeing that at the state level. And it's unfortunate that this is going to be the second year that we as a business group can't react to the state budget, where, you know, the governor gives his wish list in February. The legislature has until June 30th to pass it. And I've been doing this 25 years. There used to be a time when 3 weeks before the end of June, you know, the budget document would come out, you know, right or wrong. You know, they make decisions, right? They create the priorities, but at least give us an opportunity to opine on it, to say this is good, this is bad. I'll give you the perfect example. And this is one that I just heard yesterday, the corporate transit tax, right? Everybody's read about it, the surcharge, right? 2 years ago, the CBT 2.5% went away. They need money to fund New Jersey Transit. The governor said, let's charge 2.5% to any businesses that pay the corporate business tax. You know, and then you try to find out, is it 60 companies? Is it 600 companies? Is it retroactive? Yeah. You know, we can't react until we see the details. And I heard yesterday, I'm like, well, what's going on? Well, yeah, the details are still being worked on. It's June 11th. It's June 11th. So my fear is that, and I think I'm right, is that corporate transit tax is going to show up in the final budget, and our members are just going to have to pay it and fight it after the budget's done. And to me, that's just not good government. I mean, they should give people the information ahead of time,
Yeah.
so we could alert our members to say, this is what the state's going to do with this corporate transit tax. And your accountants could say, yeah, you were subject to CBT, you weren't subject to CBT. But to get information, Cecilia, now, even on those big items, it's not going well. And I think that's really disturbed a lot of us business groups that are there, you know, every day. I mean, it's just not good. So, it's 9:50. Again, I guess the takeaways, again, just to recap, 90-day effective date. Certification is going to be something to see. The new OPRA form is going to be something to see. But then keep in mind that, you know, you're going to be paying special fees, or if you do adjudicate, you're not sure that you're going to get the attorney fees paid. So I think we're just going to have to wait and see. So, but to Bill's point, please flood my inbox. Everybody has my email address, but I encourage you to take a look at the law and, you know, just keep me posted as you go through this. Any closing comments? If not, I'll see you at our next event. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Tony.
Thanks, Tony.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you.